Okay, so when looking at the series of sessions, I try to plan it in a way where the group are introduced to one skill and then the following session is the consolidation of how and when to apply the newly learnt skill during a competitive play. I repeated this format for 3 main skills: passing, shooting and dribbling. That I then took my participants up to session 6 with learning these 3 skills, where I believe they had the appropriate knowledge to start focusing on more complicated techniques such as faking, skill moves and other deceptive moves, which require higher levels of psychological demand. My final session incorporates all previously learnt tactics, techniques and skills and applies them to a competitive situation, which was a small-sided tournament, a big game and a penalty shootout, which all require higher levels of perceptual load compared to the first sessions. This format is progressive, however it could be too progressive if participants are not able to keep up with what is required from them. Therefore, if I were to redesign the series plan, I would adapt the sessions based on the initial subjective and objective analysis gathered from the first session. This will allow me to increase or decrease the challenge of the series and tailoring it to suit them best. Next time I would also do a standardised field test more often, as having a large number of coach devised can lack internal validity and reliability if not controlled correctly, meaning the development tracked across the sessions could be inaccurate. Okay, so when looking at the introduction to this session, I displayed confidence straight from the beginning by using my voice. We were outside, so it was pretty like windy and loud because we were outside and near main roads, etc. So I projected my voice to the group. I showed that an openness, like a friendliness, and then further into the session, we looked at confidence rating. So we did a subjective 5-finger confidence test where I got participants to rate their football passing abilities on a scale of 1 to 5 using their fingers. I got them to do it with their eyes open. So next time, if I were to repeat it, I'd get them to close their eyes. This would be because when having their eyes open, there's influence from other people in the group. So say someone put 2 as their confidence and everyone else put 4s and 5s, they would feel pressured to fit in, so therefore they would maybe go with a 4 or a 5 even though they know deep down that that's not really the right rating for them. So furthermore, like the use of closing their eyes would make sure that it stops any bias or make sure they're being honest. Then also looking at injuries and jewellery, I forgot to ask participants to remove jewellery and I forgot to ask participants if they had any injuries. So when looking at planning, I needed to make sure I stuck to my plan because I put it in the plan, but I did not deliver in the session what I said I would deliver in terms of checking those 2 elements. When looking at the warm-up, I split it into 2 sections, which contains the pulse raiser and dynamic stretches. When looking at the pulse raiser, I got the participants to jog around in a square, relatively small square, and then I got them to follow instructions using numbers, so different numbers refer to different actions. If I had younger participants, they might not remember all the different references in terms of the numbers, so it might have been easier to simplify that by saying right or left for the instructions in terms of touching your right foot or your left foot, or change referring to changing direction inside the square, or saying pace referring to a burst of pace. Furthermore, these use of words makes it a lot simpler for them to understand. But in my session, my participants were 6 boys between the age of 18 and 16, and I knew that their ability and techniques were capable enough to do this drill. Also, in this section of the session during the pulse raiser, I referred to my phone quite a lot. This is due to the fact that I hadn't memorised my plan that well. So if in sessions that appear next time, I should make sure that I've memorised all the necessary actions that I take, and this occurs throughout the whole session. So the fact that I need to make sure I use my phone less is quite a big thing. When looking at dynamic stretches, I demonstrated some of the stretches, and then also I didn't demonstrate some of the others, so there's a mixed bag there. What I should have done is I should have always demonstrated, and therefore giving clarity to the techniques. So making sure that participants are doing the correct technique is important, because it prevents injury. Also, I knew that most of the participants understood what was being asked of them, but it was the fact that I'm making sure that they know the stretches well enough so they don't get injured. So, isolated practices. I did a passing activity in groups of 3, passing in order from 1 to 3. I only used verbal instructions and I forgot to use demonstrations, so immediately a group didn't understand the activity. If I demonstrated the drill, they would have found it easier to perform correctly, limiting the amount of time wasted in the session. I should have done a demo, obviously, which would have taken 30 seconds and therefore limiting the amount of time wasted. When looking at adaptations, I could have started with a bigger area, so they have more time to select a pass due to the increase in space, and then made it smaller, increasing the challenge. However, I knew that my participants were of good enough standard to move the ball around the smaller area to begin with. When looking at a coach devised measure, I did looking at the number of successful passes in 30 seconds between a pair, so 2 people, of like a sort of 5 meter distance. To reduce the time wasting, I could have chose the pairs, and demoing one of the pairs so that all the other people in the whole session get an idea of how to do the drill. When considering the reliability and validity of this measure, some players were shortening their passes, which made it easier, so they could complete more passes in the same amount of time. This becomes less comparable across the group due to the difference in distances, which reduces the internal validity and reliability. To counter this, next time I would put control measures in place, like making sure people stay behind the cones for a pass to count. Next time, if I were to repeat this test in future sessions, which would be part of the series, they should stay in the same pairs. This is due to the fact that if the pairs were to change, their new partner may be better or worse, which would affect their new score. This would give us retest reliability. During this drill, I was effective at motivating participants by creating an enjoyable experience, whereby trying to improve is what really matters and not putting too much emphasis on who is the best. I also let the pairs focus on improving and bettering their previous passing scores. When looking at the demo, I used open questions, which meant time could have been wasted waiting for participants to answer. However, as they had done this session previously, the coaching points ran smoothly and the participants answered quite quickly. Next time, I should get them to discuss the questions in pairs to increase the involvement using collaborative thinking. Also, I only did one demonstration. I should have probably done 2 or 3 just in case people didn't understand, and I should have focused on simplifying the coaching points so that they were reduced to one word and can easily be memorized for future sessions. For example, one of the coaching points was make sure you follow through with your kicking foot. I could have shortened that to just follow through, and then it would have been easily understood by everybody. So for my conditioned practice, I did a 2v2 with 2 players on the edge as outballs. So although I knew my participants were capable of performing this drill, I may have made it a bit too challenging. I should have planned the drill differently by doing a 3v1 in the middle, using imbalanced teams giving a clear advantage to the team in possession, and then moving it on to 2v2 as the session progressed. When reflecting on this transition between my isolated practice and conditioned practice, I think the difference in challenge may be a little bit steep, and if I had a different group of participants, I think this would be more obvious, especially if they were younger, less experienced players. Furthermore, it was evident that one pair in the middle were a lot more successful at completing the passes than the other. Therefore, I increased the number of successful passes they had to make to differentiate the challenge. However, I failed to realise that one of the participants, was a lot less skilled, and this meant this task was a bit too much of a challenge for the individual of his footballing level. Next time I would most likely reduce the number of passes that his pair would have to make, or put him in the group of 3 so that there are more passing options and more time to select a pass. So, for a competitive situation, I did a small-sided game, which was a 3v3. The teams must make 5 passes and then shoot towards goal. To win the game, you have to outscore the other team, so the team with the most goals wins. So again, the use of space was something I should have adjusted sooner, as it was maybe too challenging for the participants due to me starting initially with a small space. Next time I would start off with a bigger space and then reduce the size of the space if it isn't challenging enough. This would therefore increase the perceptual load added to the challenge and increase the pressure on participants. On the flip side, during my session I noticed an imbalance in the teams, making it harder for one team as the more capable and skilled players were all together. Therefore, I quickly readjusted and reset the teams by swapping players to make the game even. When considering the cooldown, I got my participants to jog around a marked area and discuss the 3 main coaching points. When looking back at the cooldown, I should have used more clarification in my instructions, as some participants were not discussing these coaching points, suggesting they were not listening. Furthermore, if I got them to jog in pairs, it would have been more likely that they would have discussed the coaching points and then evaluate themselves in terms of which points they do well and which points they need to improve. Finally, we finish up with the plenary and end of session. After the cooldown, participants were organised into a circle and discussed the content across the session, using a Q&A to remind participants of all key coaching points and all detailed areas within the session. We discussed the use of adaptation and how some participants felt that they weren't being challenged enough, and then the fact that they were using their non-dominant foot to pass and the use of one-touch football to further increase the challenge. Then finishing up with the subjective 5-finger confidence test to evaluate how much participants believed they improved.